Hello and welcome back, Sleepy What's It here, and I have another Miniatures Monday video for you. In today's video, we're going to be doing a painting guide for Garrek's Reavers. Garrek's Reavers are the Khorne warband from the Shadespire box set for Warhammer Underworlds. Given that they are Chaos Worshippers of Khorne, they're obviously allergic to shirts, as demonstrated here, so I decided to use them as a little bit of a case study in doing flesh tones. Given that I paint a lot of undead and non-human flesh tones, this isn't necessarily my strongest area, so I wanted to work on it a bit, so I decided to go with kind of a variety of skin tones and work through them. Also, there have been some requests for models similar to what you see in things like the Rage board games, so I think some of the aesthetics are going to come across similar, so not necessarily everything can be directly applied, but I'll give you some ideas to work with. Also, the Khorne set for Age of Sigmar recently came out, so presumably some people might be vaguely interested in that. I haven't mentioned it in previous videos, though I specify which color paints I use. These are being used mostly because they are the paints that are in my set, not necessarily because they are the best paints in the world for all applications. So I'm going to put a link in the description below to a publicly shared spreadsheet that someone else came up with that I often use for doing color conversions, like when I look at a tutorial or a guide or something on certain color combinations. I look and see what's in my set. So I'm not suggesting with these videos that you should go and buy out these exact paints. This is meant more to be, this is what I did to achieve this. Go figure out what's in your paint set that will get you similar effect. So with that said, let's get into this. These models were assembled over a year ago when I originally purchased the Shadespire box set and primed at that time. So some of the things that were done here, the lack of gap filling and using a black instead of a dark gray for the beginning of the zenithal highlighting, aren't things I would do currently, but they're things we could work around. So the overall priming here is based out in black, then shot in with an airbrush from 45 degrees above with gray Vallejo primer, and then a little bit of direct on top highlighting done with white Vallejo primer. If you've seen any of my videos, you're probably very familiar with this style of priming. Since we have 3 different types of skin tones on these models, I'm going to be discussing each different type of skin tone in sequence, and then we'll kind of merge back together and I'll discuss the generic things like the metal and cloth and such that were done on all the models. So the first skin tone that we're going to be looking at here is the tanned Caucasian skin tone, basically. So this is what I did on Garrek himself and on Targor, the guy with the sword and axe. Gotta love those chaos names. I started out by basing using Tanned Shadow by Reaper. This was then washed with Reikland Fleshshade. I probably went a little bit overkill with it here because you can see some of the shadows are a little bit excessive. Then I dry brushed it with Tanned Shadow again to brighten it back up. Then another layer of dry brushing using Tanned Skin. And a final layer of highlighting using Tanned Highlight by Reaper. So the next skin tone that we're going to be doing is more of a dark skin tone. This is a skin tone I previously had a lot of difficulty getting correct. I think I did pretty well in these models, and I'm happy with how they turned out. The major change I had was to start the Reaper Triad at the mid-tone instead of the darkest color, because previously I've found that I've used too much of the darkest color and it's just become completely unreadable. So I started by basing out using Dark Skin by Reaper, then applying a wash of Agrax Earthshade by Citadel, brightening it up with a dry brush of Dark Skin, doing another dry brush of Dark Highlight, and then doing my final highlighting using a 50-50 mix of Dark Highlight and Tanned Shadow by Reaper. The third skin tone that I worked on in this project was a golden skin tone, which of the 3 I think is the one that turned out the best. This tone was achieved by first basing using Golden Shadow by Reaper, then applying a wash of Seraphim Sepia by Citadel, dry brushing it again with Golden Shadow to brighten it back up, doing another dry brush with Golden Skin, and then doing the highlighting using Golden Highlight by Reaper. After completing all of the skin tones on the models, the next thing to do was to paint the pants on them, since we're working inside out. I decided to go with a gray pant here to not distract from the rest of the model. The base layer was done using Stormy Grey by Reaper. Then I applied a bit of a diluted black wash from Reaper, which I find when you dilute it a touch goes a little bit more of a dark gray than a true black. Then I dry brushed that back with Stormy Grey to brighten it up again. Then another layer of dry brushing using Cloudy Grey. And then doing my final highlighting pass using Misty Grey. All of these paints from Reaper. Continuing in the theme of adding monochromatic paints to the models but don't make it obvious that I've done anything other than prime it, the next step was to do the black leather. This appears on some of the wrist braces on the models and on their boots. This was based out using glossy black from Vallejo. Then I dry brushed a layer of cloudy gray on it, and then did final highlighting using Misty Grey from Reaper. The other leather color that appears on these models is a brown leather, so you'll see this on some of the weapons grips, the belts, various bits dangling off their belts, and then some of their straps holding their armor plates on. This brown was achieved by glazing over the area using a thinned down hull red from Vallejo. Since we're painting Worshippers of Khorne, of course we have a bunch of skulls for the Skull Throne all over the models. So that means we're going to be doing some bone. I painted all the bone at once, including what was on the bases. I wouldn't recommend doing this if you were painting these models because I found doing the rest of the base around the skulls that had already been painted was a bit of a pain. I used my standard formula for doing bone here, so we based out using desert sand from Reaper. Then we applied a wash of Seraphim Sepia from Citadel. Dry brushed it with desert sand to brighten it back up, and then did a final highlighting pass using skeleton bone from Reaper. Since we have Garrek up here right now, I'll briefly discuss how I painted the hair on him and Tregor. I based it out using a glaze made from pure black by Reaper. Then I did some dry brushing with cloud gray, and a final highlighting pass with Misty Grey. The astute observer will notice that this is basically the same thing I did for the black leather, except that I used a matte base instead of a glossy base, and I didn't get as much coverage in my base layer as I did with the black leather. Now that we have all the neutral colors and skin tones out of the way, we can focus on some of the pops of color that are going to really make these models stand out. So the first thing we're going to do is all of the red armor plating that appear on the models. This red color was achieved by first basing out using Crimson Red by Reaper, then applying a wash of Agrax Earthshade from Citadel, then brightening it back up by dry brushing it with Crimson Red, then another layer of dry brushing using Fresh Blood from Reaper, and then I did my final highlighting using Magma Red from Reaper. As you can see a little bit on the pants and boot here, I did definitely over dry brush at points, so I do have to go back in there and glaze a little bit with the grays and blacks to knock out that red color. Since these models came in a box set with my Steel Hearts Champions, for the gray and yellow metals on the model, I decided I wanted them to be a touch darker than what you see on Steel Hearts Champions, because these are nominally the bad guys, so a little bit darker, a little bit more evil looking. So for the gray metal / steel, I first did an undercoat of Stormy Gray by Reaper. Then I based them out using Blade Steel by Reaper. Then I washed it using Nuln Oil from Citadel. Dry brushed it back up a bit with Blade Steel, and then did a final highlighting / dry brush with Filigree Silver by Reaper. This being a little bit different from what I did with my Steel Hearts Champions, where there was another brighter layer of highlighting beyond the silver. On these models, there's a lot of gold overlay. Honestly, because of all the finicky details associated with this, probably was the longest portion of the painting process for me, doing each of these layers carefully so I don't get a lot of overspill. So for the yellow, again, we're going for a slightly darker look than the bright shining color that I ended up with for my Steel Hearts Champions. So I initially did an undercoat using Uniform Brown by Reaper. Then I applied a base layer of Antique Gold by Reaper. Gave this a wash with Seraphim Sepia from Citadel. Dry brushed it with Antique Gold to brighten it up again. And then did a final dry brush / highlighting using Dragon Gold by Reaper. To originally finish off these models, I attempted to do kind of a red, desert, blasted terrain look to it. Unfortunately, the paint job actually ended up coming out looking more like a terracotta plant plot. So I scrapped that idea and did a gray stone base so that it would match the rest of my Underworlds warbands. So if you see any kind of like subtle reds poking out through the gray, that's probably where that's from. So this gray stone was achieved by first basing using Shadowed Stone by Reaper, applying a wash of Nuln Oil by Citadel, brightening it back up with a dry brush of Shadowed Stone from Reaper, doing a mid-tone Drybrush using Stone Grey by Reaper, and then doing our final highlighting using Weathered Stone. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how these models turned out. I approached this project as a learning experience on how to do human flesh tones, and I think overall that I'm very happy with how that came along, given that, like, if you look at my Steelheart's Champion face, that is not a great face. I think most of these flesh tones look a little bit more realistic. I'd rather put them on the table than some of the other human tones I've done overall. I really enjoy how the red came out in a number of places, with that transition from the dark, rich crimson to some bright, fresh blood highlights. Really pops nicely. Overall, I actually really like these models. I'm not a huge Chaos Khorne player, but I do like the dynamicism of these poses, the just general flow of them. I really do like the models. As you can see in the video, I did paint them fully assembled because, foolishly, a year ago I assembled before priming and glued everything together. If you were to start these models anew, I would probably paint them in sub-assemblies with the bodies on some sort of stand and painting the bases separate, because there is definitely a number of times where it was very hard to get onto the underside of the model because of the base and things like that. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this and found it informative. If you did, please give the video a like. If you want to see more content like this, please subscribe to the channel. I release miniatures videos every week, sometimes on Monday. If you know anyone that's looking at painting Khorne or Rage, or anything that might get some inspiration from this, please share it with them because that helps a great deal. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.